So I just watched Demon Slayer the movie Mugen Train, and I've got some things I want to say about it. First off, if you're new to the So I Just Watched series, welcome. I know I haven't done an episode in nearly a year now, but I hope to do them slightly more often from here, if I can. Secondly, as usual, this video will be split into a spoiler section and a non-spoiler section, the non-spoiler section coming first, and I'll include a spoiler warning before the spoilers start. Lastly, before I get into the meat of the video, I want to acknowledge that, unlike the other 3 episodes of this series I've done so far, the movie I'm going to be talking about here is a direct adaptation of existing source material. Yes, Dark Waters was based on real events, but I do consider this to be a different case. However, it is source material that I am not personally familiar with, so I will not be differentiating between what came from the source material and what was an adaptational change. If it's in this movie, it is fair game. Speaking of the source material, I'd like to briefly discuss it and the anime adaptation up to this point before jumping into the movie proper. Demon Slayer the manga was published in Weekly Shonen Jump from February 2016 to May 2020, and despite its relatively short run compared to many of the other really big names to come out of Shonen Jump, it absolutely demolished sales records. It is an action shonen series with light horror elements, following a boy named Tanjiro, following the slaughter of most of his family by demons, and the transformation of his sister Nezuko into a demon herself, as Tanjiro goes on a journey across Japan in search of Muzan, the king and progenitor of all demons, who is the only one who may know a way to turn Nezuko back into a human. The first season of its anime adaptation ran from April to September of 2019, and by the end of that season, Tanjiro had joined the Demon Slayer Corps. The core cast of Tanjiro, Nezuko, and fellow Demon Slayers Zenitsu and Inosuke had been formed, and they and the audience had been introduced to the Hashira, the highest-ranking members of the Demon Slayer Corps. Demon Slayer the movie, released in October 2020 in Japan and April 2021 in North America — I don't know when it was released anywhere else, and I haven't bothered to look it up — picks up right where the first season left off and follows Tanjiro, Nezuko, Zenitsu, and Inosuke as they, along with a Hashira named Rengoku, find themselves trapped on a train that has been taken over by a demon with the power to put people to sleep and control their dreams. With that out of the way, let's talk about one of the most obvious facets of this movie. It looks really good. The anime made a name for itself largely on the back of its phenomenal animation, especially in the fight scenes. And this movie is no exception. I love the traditional Japanese painting style of Tanjiro's water abilities, and the fire abilities Rengoku showed off were also a joy to look at. There was some liberal CG usage in the second third of the movie that didn't quite live up to the look of the rest of the film, but considering it was obviously supposed to be otherworldly and unsettling, I can look past that. If you're looking for a feast for the eyes, you can definitely do much worse than this. Also, and I saw the subbed version of the movie, so I can't say this with complete conviction, but I felt like the whole voice cast delivered a pretty solid performance. Unfortunately, it's with the story that I have significantly greater issues. My favorite part of the TV anime was the unique powers possessed by some of the demons, and the powers possessed by this movie's villain held a lot of potential, but I felt like very little of that potential was actually capitalized on. Obviously, dream manipulation opens the door for a ton of trippy action sequences that you would have to work really hard to justify in the real world. Just look at something like Inception. But this story was almost completely lacking in those. Instead, the Dream Demon tried to pacify the characters by showing them dreams of moments in their pasts or imagined futures that they would never want to leave. This is a totally reasonable and valid approach too, but I really don't feel like it worked that well in practice. more on that in just a moment. Before that, I'd like to expand a little more on the characters, which, if I'm being honest, has always been my biggest issue with the series. Tanjiro is a perfectly functional main character, if a little bland in my opinion, and Nezuko manages to be the best major character despite never talking, but I honestly find both Zenitsu and Inosuke to be pretty annoying. Both seem to function primarily as comic relief outside of action sequences, and while having one comic relief protagonist is alright, two is a bit much. Maybe they bother me so much because I've come to expect comic relief characters like Usopp in One Piece, or Nardole in the 10th season of the Doctor Who reboot, where there is so much more to their characters than just comedy. Or maybe it's just because I don't find either of them even a little bit funny. Either way, disliking half the main cast isn't a great recipe for liking a series. And this is all subjective on my part, so I don't blame you at all if you find these two more tolerable and have a higher opinion of the series as a result. I also remember disliking a fair number of the Hashira when we were introduced to them near the end of the anime's first season, and when I was reintroduced to Rengoku at the start of this movie, I was afraid that he was one of them, but he ended up being my favorite character in the movie. But that's beside the point for now. The reason I bring all this up is to talk about the character development potential that comes with the villain's plan. He is, after all, giving the characters a taste of what they yearn for most, and such a clear window into a character's hopes and ambitions is a fantastic recipe for expanding more on their backgrounds, their motivations, and who they are as people. There is literally no more perfect time to insert a flashback than right here. And the author obviously realized this because Tanjiro's dream is effectively a flashback to his life with his family before they were killed, and Rengoku's is about him telling his father that he has reached the rank of Hashira only for his father to tell him that that doesn't stop Rengoku from being useless. This is a fantastic window into these characters' hopes and ambitions and driving forces. So, what do we get out of Zenitsu and Inosuke's dreams? Well, Zenitsu dreams of going on a date with human Nezuko, and Inosuke dreams of leading the other members of the main cast on an expedition through a cave. The claim I'm about to make may seem a little extreme, but this reads to me not just as a failure to develop these characters any further, but almost an explicit admission that there just is nothing to them other than the frankly very shallow caricatures we've seen already. It's almost criminal, in my opinion, that a minor character who is promoted to main protagonist for just one story arc is more interesting, more fleshed out a member of the cast than two characters we've known for around 12 episodes and a movie. That said, I think this is where I'll end the spoiler-free segment of the video. The rest of the runtime will be rife with spoilers for Demon Slayer the movie, so if that is something you're trying to avoid, now is the time to stop watching. I'll give you a few seconds to do so. The first third of the movie, or maybe closer to the first half, I wasn't paying close attention to exactly when certain events happened in the runtime, ends with a fake-out death for the Dream Demon, immediately followed by the reveal that he has fused with the train, meaning that the entire vehicle effectively functions as his body now. The rest of the movie's second third is made up of an action sequence following Tanjiro and Inosuke hunting down the demon's head and attempting to cut it off. Decapitation is the only way to truly kill a demon in this universe, while the other three members of the main cast protect the passengers from the weird tendril things the demon is creating inside the train. I don't have much to say about this part of the story other than that I found the CG serviceable at best, and that bit where the demon spawns dozens of eyes and then nearly tricks Tanjiro into committing suicide felt like the only truly creative application of a demon power in this movie, and was consequently one of my favorite scenes. When Tanjiro and Inosuke do eventually manage to kill the Dream Demon, the train derails and Tanjiro is rendered effectively paralyzed for most of the rest of the movie by a wound he received during the fight. We get a nice little bonding moment between Tanjiro and Rengoku while the other three pull passengers out of the rubble, before out of nowhere, the supposedly fourth most powerful demon in existence shows up. The bulk of the last third of the movie is made up of a fight between Rengoku and this new demon, who, once again, has really underwhelming powers that were, for now at least, functionally just really fast martial arts and invisible energy blasts. I'm sure, or at least I hope, that these powers will be expanded on in the future, but considering this demon was on pretty even footing with a character who is demonstrably much stronger than any member of the protagonist squad, it'll probably be a while before we see him in another proper fight, at least in the anime. Once again, I don't have much to say about this fight scene other than pointing out again how visually stunning it is, but I will make another entirely subjective comment. That being that I'm noticing a lot of modern shonen series having early game arcs that effectively boil down in the end to the really strong good guys going up against the really strong bad guys while the main protagonists stand around and watch. Just a few days ago, as of recording, I finished reading Black Clover's Eye of the Midnight Sun encounter arc, where this happens, as well as happening in the arc right before that in the same manga. And that also makes up a lot of the first season of Jujutsu Kaisen, which I'm about 2/3 of the way through at the time of recording. One Piece was the shonen that I grew up on, and that series doesn't really have an analog until all the way in the Paramount War saga, and calling that early game is a bit of a stretch since it's supposed to be the finale of the series' first half, and that's not to mention the fact that Luffy is much more active in that story than, say, Tanjiro is in this one. This is not to say that this trope is necessarily a problem, but I'd argue that it can make the protagonists seem a bit useless when they're sidelined so much, so it's not a trope I personally care for a great deal. Anyway, the fight ends with the sun coming up, and since sunlight hurts demons, the big bad demon running away, leaving Rengoku to succumb to the injuries he accumulated during the night. In his final moments, he asks Tanjiro to pass on a message to his, Rengoku's, brother, and then gives the protagonist squad a few more words of advice and encouragement before passing on. Like I said, Rengoku was my favorite character in this movie, so it's sad to see that he won't be a mainstay in the series moving forward, but his death does give adequate consequences to one of the series' biggest and baddest making an appearance, and raises the stakes for what to expect going forward. After a bit more conversation between Tanjiro, Inosuke, and Zenitsu, the movie ends with a montage of the other Hashira reacting to Rengoku's death. Except that it doesn't, because right before the credits roll, it cuts back to Tanjiro crying and repeating Rengoku's name several times, which was something we had pretty much already seen, and really broke up the pacing of the ending for me. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Demon Slayer the movie Mugen Train. It's a visually stunning film with quite a bit of squandered potential in the story department. Frankly, that's kind of how I feel about most of the series. It does the basic shonen formula really well, but not much beyond that, and to me at least, a story that takes risks and stumbles here and there will almost always be more interesting than one that's really good at playing it safe. If I remember correctly, this is already the highest grossing anime movie in Japan, though, so clearly a lot of people disagree with me here. And if you are one of them, I'm really glad you enjoyed this movie as much as you did. And I'm sorry that it didn't resonate enough with me for me to be celebrating its success along with you. I've been Brainy Diode, and until next time, I want you to know that I still haven't come up with a good outro. Yep, that's how I'm ending it.